No risk it, no biscuit.
Arizona Cardinals fans, do you see red? Are you part of the Red Sea? Then you are listening to the show for you. A podcast for Cardinals fans, by Cardinals fans, with outsider and insider perspectives. It's time to rise up and see red. Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans. Welcome to the latest edition, episode number 164 of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site for the Arizona Cardinals. My co-host is Seth Root. That's my brother, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, SB Nation's Arizona Cardinals site. And Seth is also the host of the NFL Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth, how is everything going? I believe you were just recording another show. This was double duty night again for the second week in a row, was it not?
Yeah, with the week 0 in college football, now a thing. It's frustrating, but now a thing. And so we wrapped up kind of the first weekend where a couple intriguing, however not great prospects played, and then we previewed the week to come, which has a lot of great games and a lot of looks at some really talented prospects, and then all highlighted, of course, by the epic matchup of New Mexico State and wrong game. Obviously,
no. That's the one that matters. That's the one that matters.
Obviously, Arizona State. We did spend some time on Arizona State for you, Jess. At the beginning of the show, you can listen in and get our concerns.
Is it talking about Kalen Ballage?
Yeah, our concerns with Kalen Ballage. And why the heck hasn't he been the feature back ever at ASU? Obviously, you and I know that might have more to do with some inability from the offensive coordinators and head coach to make poignant terms of putting players in the best position to succeed, but still, with how bad DeMario Richard was last year, you expected a little more. But yeah, so it was a fun show, and then we wrapped up, of course, with obviously Florida State, Alabama, which hopefully lives up to the hype. I guess that's the only thing you can say about that game, because you're talking about basically every great prospect that's come out in the last, or high school prospect that's come out in the last 3 years is playing in that game. So it should be a lot of fun to watch.
And we've got all sorts of stuff coming up for this show. This is our roster prediction show. We are so very, very close to the end of the preseason. We're recording on a Tuesday night, so you're going to be listening to this, Wednesday evening, Thursday, maybe even Friday. Roster cutdowns happen this weekend. The Cardinals will have to take their roster of nearly 90 players. I think they might be at 88 or 89 right now after they released Daniel Gray recently. Didn't sign anyone, but they've got to cut down, 35-ish players before Saturday afternoon. While everyone is enjoying their Labor Day weekend, Seth and I will be waiting at our computers from about noon on, hoping the Cardinals please release their cut list closer to 1 o'clock Arizona time than later, because they have been one of the last ones to do it the last few years. I'd rather be out doing stuff, but hey, that's blogger life, writer life. But this episode, number 164, we're going to talk about what the Arizona Cardinals roster could look like for week 1. We're not going to really consider the potential of waiver pickups because it's really kind of difficult to do. But before we do that, let's talk about some takeaways from their really kind of an impressive 24-14 win last Saturday over the Atlanta Falcons on the road in the preseason, a game in which the starters, there was a little bit of sluggishness early from the offense, but both the offense and the defensive starters really sort of dominated the defensive starters of the Falcons, something that is a big positive for me. What were your big takeaways from the game on Saturday? You're on mute.
I needed to find out from Falcons Twitter what the Falcons have done this preseason, because it looked not like the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, let's be honest. And part of that, you don't want to take too much away from the Arizona Cardinals, but part of that was, that throw Matt Ryan made that Patrick Peterson dropped. I mean, that was a silly throw. Maybe it's just preseason, maybe, whatever. So I found out they basically, not played at all one series in the previous game. It looked like it, but to that point, you liked the pass defense. I think there are legitimate concerns about the running game, or about the run defense, excuse me. Tevin Coleman is a really, really nice second running back. Would probably start on close to 50% of the ball. But they didn't have their normal one-two punch. They didn't have Devontae Freeman out there, and they were still gouging the Cardinals for yardage. That was the only negative takeaway, because obviously the first-team defense allowed 0 points, forced turnovers, one against Matt Ryan, then one against Matt Schaub, Marcus Golden with the sack fumble. And then offensively, you saw the stagnation that we've seen before from the first team offense. Silly mistakes from Chris Johnson that probably David Johnson doesn't make. 2 fumbles. Maybe Palmer was feeling a little pressure is probably not the right word, but just feeling like he had to make a play on a throw. He forced to Jermaine Gresham in double coverage on a seam route. But then they kind of answered, came back and answered. And the pass to Carson Palmer to John Brown is exactly what you needed to see out of this team. And kind of said, okay, Palmer can still make that throw. Brown, absolutely obliterated the the cornerback trying to cover him. Made him look silly, and then all of a sudden you just kind of took a deep breath and go, okay, all right, maybe this team is ready. And it was the way you wanted to see that team end. Obviously, Drew Stanton came in, threw another touchdown pass to John Brown on a great throw, great catch, and really kind of signified why, for now, Stanton is the backup that Arians trust, because that's not a throw that you see Blaine Gabbert try to make, whether it's a stupid throw or not. And I realized he had drawn the defense offside, so he was going to take a chance either way. That's something that we have seen Stanton do numerous times in this offense. And that's something that you're still waiting for Blaine Gabbert to do, and in Bruce Arians' offense, that's important. And so, overall, I thought you were happy with the way this game turned out, because I thought you saw dominant performances from the defense, from the Arizona Cardinals passing game at times, even without David Johnson, Larry Fitzgerald, and then I thought, the second team and the third team both came in and kind of continued that. 24 points is, it may not seem like a lot, but in a preseason game, when you get 3 scores from all 3 teams, I think that's a great game.
I agree. And we saw actually some elements of 2015 of kind of that are characteristics that are just kind of the things that are characteristic for the team in terms of makeup. They start a little sluggish. They look a little bit iffy on the run defense early, but boom, they get a big play. So they get an interception. It's like a flip of the switch and they didn't get those big plays last year. So once a big play happens, whether it's the tip pass that gets picked off by Tyrann Mathieu or the touchdown to John Brown, once something happens, the swagger and the confidence is there, and they ride it and it continue to dominate. And we talked about the beginning of last year where it seemed like they were just waiting for something to happen and it never happened. And we've talked about for years how they are a team that plays from ahead really well and plays a little tight when they run behind. That's especially early in the game. Late in the game, they handle it really well. Late in the game, they tend to do well in situations where they're behind, especially when they had the lead earlier going into the end and they give up the lead. But you see that trait again, because once someone makes a play, then they're loose, then they're playing with swagger, then they're making plays, and they look like a dominant team as opposed to a tentative team trying not to make mistakes. I was impressed by the fact that it's good that you got touchdowns from all three quarterbacks. You got to see, Phil Dawson come in and just nail another kick. The defense played well. I mean, you had concerns overall, but we're going to talk about that more as we go on for the roster. But as things go in the preseason, the wins and the losses they have, obviously Hall of Fame game you just kind of write off because who knows what that's for. A game against the Raiders, you were positive because you saw the starters and the backups do well, and then the young guys not screw it up. Against the Bears, you got to see the back of the roster guys making plays down the stretch to kind of put them in a position to win. So there was game scenarios that they could play out. And then against the Falcons, the quote unquote dress rehearsal for the regular season, you got plays from both sides of the ball, from all the different teams. You really couldn't you couldn't have scripted it any better, except for a couple of the fumbling. The fumbling was the issue, but that's not the focus of what we want to talk about tonight on this show. We want to talk about the roster. Coming down is the Thursday night game against the Denver Broncos, which seems like a yearly tradition that they play the Denver Broncos in the last preseason game, and then roster cuts. And so what Seth and I want to do in this show is go through what our picks and predictions are for the final roster, for the 53-man roster coming up that we're going to have this weekend. And kind of discuss the storylines, where those players are, especially at the back end of the roster. What have they done? What do they do against Atlanta? What do they need to do in this last preseason game? And so we're going to start with that. We're going to kick it off with quarterback and the best, basically the skill players. So let's go ahead and get started.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
Some brands offer you low finance, or cashback, or servicing.
Renault don't do ors. We do ands. The Renault Kadjar with 1.91% APR and €1,000 cashback and 3 years servicing, saving you thousands. Renault, the brand with the ands. Visit your local Renault dealer. Finance is made under a hire purchase agreement. Terms and conditions apply. Deposit required subject to lending criteria. See Renault.ie.
53-man roster prediction. We're going to talk quarterback first. I don't think there's any doubt for you or for me that we know the three players who will be on the roster, and that is Carson Palmer, Drew Stanton, and Blaine Gabbert. It's a lock. There was never any doubt for me, really, but honestly, never any doubt from the time he was signed, other than the fact that unless he was absolutely horrific, they were going to keep Blaine Gabbert on the roster all year and use that roster spot. And I don't care what anyone else says about keeping a third quarterback on the roster. If they kept Matt Barkley on the roster for an entire season, they can do it for Blaine Gabbert because Matt Barkley was, kind of just a nifty guy to have on the roster.
I mean, they pulled up Zach Dysert from the practice squad after the fourth game, and he was on the roster the rest of the year. Let's not act like keeping Blaine Gabbert's this abomination. Of the team. Yeah, it's those three. I mean, the only way that they do anything is if they get kind of an offer that they can't turn down for a Drew Stanton or a Blaine Gabbert. And you and I mean, we don't see that happening. I don't think it happens. And so it's going to be these three guys. Gabbert probably won't be active on game days, and that's just not a big deal, and that's just the way the NFL kind of works in terms of when they have three quarterbacks on the roster. But until, knock on wood, Stanton gets hurt, we won't even talk about QB1 getting hurt. So until Stanton gets hurt, and then Gabbert will be active. But not a surprise. They're going to keep three. Call it a wasted roster spot, but I mean, are you going to be upset? Trust me, I like Marquis Christian as much as the next guy, but with the injury history of quarterback one, Andrew Stanton, you probably should have three on the roster.
And you have to look at the perspective of what the Cardinals are doing. They've said all along that they want to have the future potentially. And on Tuesday, Bruce Arians is on the record as saying this. He'd be comfortable with Blaine Gabbert this year. He's actually been super impressed with his mental preparation, his ability to grasp the offense and the offensive concepts and be able to explain it back. So obviously he's got the smarts. So he said he'd be comfortable if Blaine had to play this year. The issue then that after that, he said, and he's been impressed with him so much now that if he continues on the same trajectory, he sees him long-term as potentially a starter, which there was some discussion as to, here on local radio waves about, well, what if they got a trade offer? Would you trade Blaine Gabbert for a fourth-round pick? If you think he might be a starting quarterback, you don't make that trade at all, even though a fourth rounder for Blaine Gabbert seems like gold. If you think at all he might be a starting quarterback for you, especially in 2018, even a fourth rounder is not worth it. I mean, if you think he's going to be the backup in 2018, you can't trade him for a fourth-round pick either, because you're looking at, one of your top two quarterbacks, and that's kind of what you have to do. So I wouldn't trade Blake. If they see anything in him, they can't trade him for any pick other than like a first or second rounding, as crazy as that sounds.
No, they can't. And like you said, if you trade him, it's because you don't see him as a starter. So if they trade him, they think that, let's just throw a name out there. I'm trying to think of Cardell Jones, just a name that we all know. They think Cardell Jones, possibly cut by the Los Angeles Chargers, is a better or is a more intriguing prospect than what they saw out of Blaine Gabbert. But here's the thing, and I've written about this. I'm sure you've written about this. We've talked about this. When it's all said and done, the Cardinals typically give a guy an entire year on the roster. Ryan Lindley got an entire year. Logan Thomas got an entire year.
Matt Barkley got an entire year.
Matt Barkley got an entire year. Zach Dysert got an entire year. Now you might say, what about Phillip Sims? He was a tryout.
He was a camp invite.
Yeah, a tryout invite. Like, he wasn't a guy they put any investment into. And for that matter, honestly, every name we just listed, they didn't put any investment into. They wanted to see what the guy had. This is standard operating procedure for the Arizona Cardinals. It would be actually completely different if they cut somebody, or if they cut Gabbert after just, 2 months and brought in somebody else. Because again, when they brought in Matt Barkley, they had already had Logan Thomas for a full year. So that wasn't, the same thing. Then they kept Barkley for the year and then let him go and brought in somebody else. So that's where they're at right now.
And, I like the notion, and this is kind of following the narrative that we both have believed, is Blaine Gabbert was always about 2018. He's a guy they want to bring in to know the offense. He's kind of a broken quarterback, it seems, but has all the athletic traits and the quarterback traits that Bruce Arians wants and potentially the Cardinals would want. They've been looking at it as the future. Carol Goodwin talked about it. Michael Bidwell talked about it. So Blaine Gabbert is a guy they have on their radar to be at least a backup in 2018. And so Yeah, so obviously it doesn't matter. We saw what we need for Blaine Gabbert. When he was on the field for the most part, and he was playing against backups and third stringers, he looked like the best player on the field, like he should have. And that's, if you're taking, like we talked, you mentioned last week, you look at a Blaine Gabbert and you say, oh, he's a developing young player. He looks good. So you think positively. But that's kind of, even though he's a 7-year veteran, you almost kind of have to take that perspective because of the situations he's been in and look at him as a quarterback that's starting over. And what do you see? A guy with some potential who, if this were year 2, had he been drafted in 2016, and that's what he's doing in year 2, you'd be super thrilled and think that probably he could be the starter the following year. But yeah, probably spending too much time talking about Blaine Gabbert, but it's the summer of Blaine Gabbert. And so we know those 3 guys are going to be on the roster. And
to be fair, it's the last time we'll talk about them all year.
That is true. Blaine Gabbert will just be lingering on the roster all season until, if Carson Palmer retires, we have the great quarterback battle of Drew Stanton and Blaine Gabbert. It won't be Matthew Stafford and Blaine Gabbert because my dream was ruined of the Cardinals bringing in Matthew Stafford because now he's getting paid a lot of money.
Young, man. He's only 20. He's only 29. He'll be 34 when the contract is up.
That's true.
He'll be a Cardinal. It'll be all, everything will be wonderful.
And he'll be Byron Leftwich coaching him.
Yep, Byron Leftwich starting, or head coach, and obviously Matthew Stafford, 34-year-old starting quarterback.
That's perfect. So,
and then after that, it'll be Carson Wentz. So everything will show up in due time.
So we've got Blaine for the next 6 years. Is that the plan?
Yep.
Perfect. Running back. This is where I think we diverge a little bit. Things got kind of messy after TJ Logan. TJ Logan's injury. He's going to go on injured reserve. I like the fact that teams can bring back 2 players this year. Now we know that David Johnson's the number 1. My running back room looks like this. There's 4, not 5. It would have been 5 with TJ Logan, I think. But I've got David Johnson, I've got Chris Johnson, I've got Kerwin Williams, and I got Elijah Penny. I leave Andre Ellington off the roster. I don't care what people said about the 2 fumbles for Chris Johnson. The fact that he's not playing on Thursday tells me one thing. He's secure on the roster. And Kerwin Williams, we know, was a lock. And then to me, it comes down to Andre Ellington and Elijah Penny. The comments that I'm reading and hearing is that they're trying to remake their core special teams. I see Stephon Taylor in Elijah Penny. Doesn't do anything exceptionally well, like in terms of offense, but he gives you what you need on special teams. And Andre Ellington doesn't play a lick of special teams, and his dynamic is there's the potential to be there. I had most of the time after each game, and Penny, I bumped him at the end this time because of special teams and for anything else. I don't see Ellington, and I don't see Ellington's having the edge over Chris Johnson, as some analysts around here have suggested. I don't think there's a chance that Johnson's getting cut off this roster, because that's why they brought him back. They know what he can do. I'm sure the game on Saturday raised some concerns. Oh crap! But then he bounced back. He looked good when he was running. He's going to be the guy they keep.
Yeah, and I think in the end, we talked about it, Logan, the injury, it opened up the door for Kerwin Williams to guarantee himself a roster spot. And we felt strongly that Kerwin was going to make the roster, but it opened up the door for a virtual guarantee. And we've seen that because they're not letting him run the football at all. They're like, nope. Not happening again. You're good enough. He's not TJ Logan explosive, exciting as a return man, but he is consistent and he's been productive, and that's, a giant uptick compared to what they've had. I'm with you kind of. I don't see how Chris Johnson doesn't make this roster. I've wanted Elijah Penny to make this roster, but for a guy that's, roughly 6'5" and 325 pounds, he just doesn't run like it. He doesn't run like it, and that's kind of frustrating to watch him. When you're a big running back, you're expected to, take those negative runs and turn them into positive runs. He hasn't been doing that. You're expected to take those short runs, turn them into medium runs. He just hasn't done that. So I think when it's all said and done, you're going to get Johnson. I think Andre Ellington is on this roster because of, what he has done for the team in the past and the comfort level the Cardinals have with him, and then Kerwin Williams because he'll be the main return man. But I think Penny probably ends up back on the practice squad. However, James Summers got a lot of carries last game and didn't look awful. And he's transitioning.
He did not.
And he's transitioning from, a position as opposed to being a running back throughout his career. So he's moved from quarterback, wide receiver now to running back. So we'll see, what happens with James Summers. Maybe he's an intriguing, stash practice squad type player.
And I can see that being the case. If Penny makes the roster, if Ellington Ross makes the roster, it's probably Penny over Summers. I don't think they would. I don't know how many running backs they keep on the roster for that. Wide receiver. I think there was some discussion. Bruce Arians, when he was on the air with Bickley Murata on the radio here locally, suggested maybe they keep more receivers than they normally would. Suggesting perhaps 7, because Arians already said 6, 5 receivers, 6 receivers. That's kind of a normal thing, but keeping an extra more than normal, like suggesting keeping a 7th, that sounds a little bit crazy. Now, I don't have them going 7, but I have a theory as to why they would. So let me give you my 6 first. It's basically what it's been mostly the entire time. Obviously, Larry Fitzgerald makes the roster. Both Browns, Jerron and John, make the roster. JJ Nelson, Chad Williams, who, if it weren't for that 3rd-round pick, probably doesn't make the roster. And then Britton Golden at number 6.
You hit that one on the head, too. So the poor Chad Williams. He looked good. He had moments, but he is not. He is Anquan Bolden. He is not at this point,
and not even the hands either that they kept talking about. Come on, stop it! But I give Golden the edge, and Jeremy Ross is a hard guy to keep off the roster. But while he has a little more size, Britton Golden's been an assistant for a long time. He's a little more versatile on special teams. He does give you return ability like Ross does, but he's a little bit faster. And Golden truly, because he's had time with the ones, he's had time with the starters, he's looked good. He's made plays. He was great all off season, according to Carson Palmer. So I can't see keeping him off the roster. But here's my theory on the 7 receiver. Some were discussing, it's too hard to decide, so they keep both Golden and Ross. I do not believe that would be the case. They're citing the Olsen Pierre stash from a year ago where they kept 9 defensive linemen, and he was inactive all season. The only reason you do that is if you have control of the player beyond this next season. You do not have that with Britton Golden or Jeremy Ross. Jeremy Ross has been in the league since 2012. He's being an unrestricted free agent, so it would be actually pointless to stash him on the roster because there's nowhere to stash him. He disappears after the end of the year. If they somehow keep 7 receivers, one would be because they want to keep one of their undrafted guys like a Carlton Agudosi, who I have heard he's a favorite. Bruce Arians mentioned him on the radio. I was glad to see Carlton get a catch. He called him. He mentioned him by name on Tuesday as well, saying, if he doesn't make the team, he'll probably be on the practice squad, assuming he doesn't get claimed off waivers. Or here's the other one, Aaron Dobson. B.I. really likes him. He totally knocked it out of the ballpark in his workout at the end of last year. They didn't end up signing him. He was a little bit banged up, so they assigned Ross instead. But Dobbs completely wowed them. He gives them the size and speed that they lost in Michael Floyd, and some of he also brings some of the concerns of injury and drops, but he looked really good in the spring. He was getting behind defensive backs, and because of his injury last year, since he didn't play last year, he only has 2 credit years, so he would still be a restricted free agent. So he'd be a player they could stash if they see him perhaps as developing into something. As we know, after next year, we've got both Jerron and John Brown hitting free agency. If they want some stability at the position, there's the possibility of stashing him as number 7. I don't think it'll happen, but if they were to go 7, it wouldn't be to keep Ross. It would keep to Dobson, or it'd be to keep Agadosi.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think Dobson, they'd have to keep. I think Agadosi and Krishan Hogan are both guys that probably end up on the practice squad. They may be similar in size and style, but they're both guys that you are intrigued by. And neither one really did much during the preseason in actual gameplay. But Dobson, I would think you'd have to keep him, right? Like if you want him for the future, obviously that's, the more pressing thing. You kind of hit it on the head though. The draft value, if you will, of Chad Williams is restricting their movement abilities in terms of making a move. Now, there is one intriguing nugget out there. I've been trying to get a hold of people, and nobody's going to tell me anything. But the Buffalo Bills are in Arizona, and you wonder why. Could they be there for a trade? Who knows? The only person I've been able to kind of reach out and get any information from said, obviously the Bills are looking to make moves. It doesn't mean that anything's happening, but if it were to happen, could it be a wide receiver? Because like you said, maybe the Cardinals do want to keep a Aaron Dobson, and put a Carlton Agadosi on the practice squad, or keep a Carlton Agadosi overall, and they're able to trade, I don't know, maybe a JJ Nelson.
Here's my theory on that. They would keep Dobson initially on the roster so they could trade him, and he would be the trade bait because he's got the size, speed. But they wouldn't want to waive him early, so they hold him on the roster so they have time to, if they couldn't get a deal done like Friday. Yeah, I could see that. I could see them keeping a 7th guy on the roster for a couple of days until they got a trade done.
Right, and so maybe it is just like you said, a couple days to try to get a move made or something like that. But it just seems unlikely, so to speak. So, the wide receiver room seems set. It seems set from the beginning. The question was always, does a 6th guy push his way onto the roster? And I think you had 2 guys in the preseason, and Golden and Ross, play their way onto the roster. I think you've had 2 guys in training camp in Krishan and Agadosi who have done enough to continue to be intriguing players. And I think you had Aaron Dobson, who they brought in for a reason. They wanted that Michael Floyd type receiver on the roster, and unfortunately for Dobson, he's just been completely injured the entire time, so it's taken away from him. So all of it makes sense.
Tight end. I had 3 guys on my roster for a tight end almost the entire preseason, and then bumped it to 4. So the 3, I think we could probably agree on: Jermaine Gresham and Troy Nicholas, right? You have Afani Moma on your roster?
Yes.
And then I add Hakeem Vallis as a 4th. Because of the number of 2 tight end sets they do, it leaves them a little bit vulnerable and especially with a guy like Troy Nicholas and Afani Moma. Neither one of them has completed an NFL season yet. And they've landed on an injury reserve every single year. So keeping 4 would seem to be a safe play And Vallis also plays everything on special teams, which gives him also a little bit of added value. Something I didn't know about him, I don't remember if I talked about this on a previous show, but I did not know that Vallis, just like Ifeanyi Moma, is a converted receiver. Based on how he played last year, I thought he was more of a blocker than a receiver, but apparently he is the younger version of Ifeanyi Moma. And so what I end up doing, I end up shorting the offensive line to 8 players, which we'll discuss in a moment, where as opposed to, are you just keeping 3?
Yep, just the 3. I think Ricky Seals-Jones is the guy that they might try to stash on the practice squad as a eventual, Nicholas or Moma replacement type, and Vallis is a guy that they can bring back because Hakeem Vallis, nice player, but he's a dime a dozen kind of blocking tight
right
end. So
really the story of the preseason has been you don't really notice anything about the tight ends. The only thing is that Jermaine Gresham's there, yay. Troy Nicholas hasn't gotten hurt, even yay. Ifeanyi Moma has had moment, and he's looked good. Not only has his blocking improved, but you see him when he gets the ball. He's very difficult to tackle. He's fierce once he has the ball and gaining extra yards. So, but I've always thought that those 3 were critical. The Gresham, Trick, Nicholas, Moma. Vallis is the wild card for me, and as you'll see, I cut an offensive lineman that will not be a popular. My gut on this is that what I think is not a popular move among Cardinals fans. Anything else about them on the tight ends that you want to bring up?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, so take a break real quick. We're going to be back on Rise Up See Red, and we're going to talk about next. We're going to talk about the trenches. So we're going to go offensive line, defensive line, and then basically the rest of the front 7. We'll talk inside and outside linebackers. That's coming up on Rise Up See Red next. We're back. We're back on Rise Up See Red, and we're going to now talk for the next section. We're going to talk about kind of the trenches, the guys that aren't flashy most of the time. So we're going to talk about the offensive line, talk about what we want to see, what they needed to see, what they've done, talk about the defensive line, who's not going to make it, and then we're going to talk about the linebacker position. So we move a little bit away to some more of the playmakers. Offensive line, I've kept 9 up until now, and I drop it to 8, and here's the part that Cardinals fans aren't going to like. I'm unsure about Dorian Johnson. I'm unsure about the play that they're making on him because, one, yes, he's got the potential. They like what he offers, but he has not done anything at all. He hasn't flashed anything. He's been working with the 3s. He's been time, and he's not flashed at all. Are they trying to not play him to keep him off of film? Because, one, they've got the medical condition. That's going to scare some teams away. You keep him off the field like he's been garbage, but then they're going to try and stash him on the practice squad. I don't know, but I have him cut off this roster, and it's not a popular move because he's a 4th rounder, and people saying, how could you cut a 4th-round pick? It's like, well, can you keep a 4th-round pick and a 3rd-round pick that are just buried on the back of the roster, especially when you've got guys you can think about for the future? So here's my offensive line. Obviously, the 5 starters. You've got Humphries, Upati, Shipley, Bateman, Phil Deer. And then I think it's been more or less set. John Wetzel, Cole Toner are set, though there was some suggestion that perhaps there might be a little bit of competition with Toner for Tony Bergstrom, who does a lot of the same things, a little more experienced, a little more versatile. And then I keep Will Holden. He was a guy I thought perhaps could get cut and end up on the practice squad, but the amount that they've been playing him, they have him playing. I mean, they've played him at tackle. He's listed at guard on the depth chart. His versatility plus the amount that he's playing, and he showed a little something. His athletic ability and length are intriguing enough that, say, in a year or 2, he could be either your swing tackle backup or even a starter. So that's where I go with this. I take Holden over Ulrich John, though John has been a little bit better overall. Holden gives a position flexibility. And then Dorian Johnson, I think, will come back to the practice squad. I don't think anyone's going to pick him up based on the tape that he's got for the preseason and the medical. But still, I'm not going to be well liked for saying that they're going to cut Dorian Johnson, but it wouldn't surprise me if they kept him just because of the draft pick. But then I'm just like, he's been bad.
He has, and Will Holden hasn't been much better, but Birdie told me they like Dorian. I'm probably wrong on this. I keep 9 though. Obviously the starters, as you talked about, and then I keep Ulrich John over Will Holden, keep Dorian Johnson, and then you have Cole Toner and John Wetzel. After made last week, I don't know if Cole Toner's ever being looked at as a starter, but he could be a valuable asset to this team for, his another contract, and then maybe another 2 to 3 years after that as the, kind of main backup to everybody. So that's why, see, here's the thing to me. If after Arian's statement on Toner, something you and I have talked about before is that, we weren't sure where Cole Toner fit on this team. And then after Arian's statement on Wetzel's bigger, stronger, then why keep Cole Toner? Like, what's the upside of Toner to a Will Holden or a Dorian Johnson in that case, if you're still concerned about functional play strength? Obviously, we know Toner's smart, being a Harvard guy, so I think they like the positional flexibility in a pinch that he can probably play, at least 4 positions, maybe all 5, and so that gives them one guy backing up at least 4 positions. Maybe they kick Wetzel out to left tackle or kick Veldier back over to left tackle if need be. But I think that's why they would keep Toner over, Johnson or Holden, guys that haven't had the chance to prove themselves like Toner has.
And you talked about it even a year ago. Cole Toner is kind of like Earl Watford, a guy who, Arians loved. Talked about him every year during the spring, every year during training camp about finding reps for him. Cole Toner might be that guy. He's not as athletic as Watford was. But what did they do with Watford as soon as his contract went up? They let him go. Versatile, athletic, upside, could fill in as a starter. But ultimately, they didn't want to keep him. So, maybe that's the case. I was starting to get the impression perhaps that they see him perhaps as being, and maybe this is it. They see him perhaps developing more into a center and maybe could be a starting setter perhaps as opposed to guard. Now, when you've got a John Wetzel, he's the size of a tank, 6'7", almost 330 pounds. Especially when you have to replace Mike Upate, who is a giant of a man himself. You go with that. Plus, Wetzel's done well. He's played and started at those guard positions and done well as well. So, Ulrich John, Will Holden is a toss-up for me. I think they lean Holden there. You keep Dorian. I know that they like Dorian. It's hard for me to keep him on the roster. That's just my take on that. Defensive line. I don't think we're going to vary too much on this. They're not going to stash anyone this year on the defensive line. I've got them keeping 7. Only, I think I might have only done 6 last week because suddenly a guy who came roaring back onto my radar was Rodney Gunter. And Rodney Gunter played not a single snap against the Bears, which was a red flag to me. They mentioned on the air how he'd been practicing with the third team. Red flag. But then after Olsen Pierre left, he didn't even get to play a snap on defense because he got a concussion on the opening kickoff. And Gunter was gangbusters. He looked like the Rodney Gunter we saw his rookie year and in flashes last year. So Rodney Gunter's back on my radar. I've got the 7 that I've had the entire preseason. That's Frosty Rucker, Corey Peters, and Josh Morrow as a starter. Then you've got Robert Candice, Olsen Pierre, Xavier Williams, and Rodney Gunter. No Ed Stinson. He's going to get healthy, and then he's going to get cut. They just need to get him healthy enough so they can cut him.
Exactly. So I have the same 7. I don't think there's any real questions at this point, especially with everybody, for the most part, healthy heading into the final or into the regular season.
And linebacker, this is where we could have some fun. Outside linebacker is a position where we know they like what they have, at least up front, but not in the back. We know that Chandler Jones is going to be in the roster. We know Marcus Golden is going to be on the roster. We know that Kareem Martin has killed it this offseason in the preseason. And he has apparently finally, the light went on with him. The super athletic, the guy with the same athletic testing as, comparable athletically to Davion Clowney, who went number 1 overall in that draft. Never, they wanted him to be an edge player, but he didn't know anything enough yet. So they kicked him inside to the defensive tackle position, and he wasn't strong enough for that. Then they moved him back out. He's done a lot on special teams. He's good that way. But now it looks like he finally figured it out, which will be a big thing for him because it's year 4. And if he can flash, then being that position that he is as a potential pass rusher, he could cash in after the end of the year or potentially come back as a role player. But for me, as exciting as Cappy was over the preseason, I know that there are concerns about his ability to do that against more than third stringers. So I still have Jarvis Jones. So I've got Chandler Jones, Marcus Golden, Kareem Martin, and Jarvis Jones. That last guy on the roster, tenuous at best, because as we learned recently, the Cardinals put a claim in on Coney Ely. Coney Ely would play that position if he were on the Cardinals. So they are looking to upgrade their 4th spot at outside linebacker.
And I have Chandler Jones, Marcus Golden, Kareem Martin, and I do have Cappy on the initial 53. As you said, after cuts are made, he may not be. They may go with a more veteran presence, but I think he beats out Jarvis Jones. In the end, I don't think either of the guys are on the roster come game 1, unless they just can't sign a guy that they really want to.
Yeah, I know the notion that I've heard people say that 3 to 5 players will get off waivers. I don't know if you want that. I mean, the Cardinals are far enough back on the waiver wire that do you want them putting in waiver claims on all the people they want? But then what do they end up with? More than one. They've got to keep them. I think they're going to look at outside linebacker. They might look at receiver perhaps, but ultimately, I don't think they're going to end up with a lot of waiver claims. They might put a few claims in, but still, 13th in the pecking order with 1,200 players suddenly, becoming unemployed. It's going to be a tough sell. I don't see a lot of change, maybe 1 or 2, maybe. Which brings us to inside linebacker. Here I keep, I have been fairly consistent on this, and that's been 5. I've got an extra guy at inside linebacker, and that is simply because of Scooby Wright, a guy that Bruce Arians said will find a place on the team for him because he's a core special teamer. He is dynamic on special teams. He's intense on special teams, and he makes some noise on defense until you have to have him playing against, starters, and then he looks slow unless it's a run up the middle, and then then he can do it. But otherwise, he shows up at the play about the time the play is over. He gets caught in coverage. But my 5 inside backers are Deion Buchanan, Carlos Dansby, Hassan Reddick, Josh Bynes. I think makes the squad as their veteran guy. He can play special teams. He can also be, maybe even say Dansby or Buchanan gets hurt. Well, especially if Dansby gets hurt, it's Bynes, I think, that comes into that position as opposed to moving Buchanan over or putting Reddick in that position, because you have a veteran who can diagnose plays and get people lined up. And so Bynes becomes very valuable in that sense, especially if Dansby at all has to miss any time at any point during the season.
Right. And so you have, like you said, Buchanan and Dansby as your starters. Bynes will probably start game 1 next to Carlos Dansby. Maybe Reddick starts. Maybe he does. But I think Bynes will end up getting more of the snaps at that inside backer position in game 1. And then, Wright's your last case scenario, special teams, ace, linebacker, kind of taking over that Gabe Martin role.
Is there any chance where a guy like Xavier Gooden or Philip Wheeler could get in?
Wheeler more than Gooden. Gooden's been bad this preseason. So.
And he's a guy that's bounced around. When I was reading through some stuff, actually, here's a little tidbit. Aaron Dobson, who was cut by the Patriots last year, who was shopped, no one ever traded for him, got cut, was signed by the Lions briefly, and then 3 days later was cut in favor of Xavier Gooden. There you go. A little bit of Cardinals trivia. Now they're teammates again.
For now. And then probably both of them will be unemployed. That's what it sounds like. Yeah, this is where it'll be interesting to see, as we mentioned, the waiver wire for outside linebacker. At inside linebacker, I don't think there's a lot of wiggle room because you've already got Carlos Dansby, because you've got Dan Buchanan, Reddick, who's got invested. Yeah, unless they just feel like Buchanan and Reddick are both ready enough for week one, and then they don't keep Bynes, which would be surprising. But
that would be a surprise.
And they don't keep Bynes to keep a sixth safety, as we'll get to.
And so let's wrap this part up, and we're going to come back on Rise Up See Red after the break, and we're going to talk about the rest of the roster. So defensive backs, the cornerbacks, the safeties, and, of course, the specialists, and the oh-so-gripping competition at punter. That's coming up next to Rise Up See Red. We're back on Rise Up See Red for the final part of the show, and we're going to talk about the rest of the roster. The defensive backs, cornerbacks, safeties, and then of course, the specialists that are left. So cornerback, it's really interesting what's happened with that position. You went from Patrick Peterson and I don't know who, with pretty much a whole bunch of Cardinals fans really worried about Justin Bethel. And you called it. I know I did. Justin Bethel was going to be the starter this year if he's healthy, and he's going to be fine. And it turns out, with all the evidence that we've got so far in the preseason, and we had in camp, and we had in the spring, guess what? Justin Bethel's the starter. He outplayed everyone, and he's fine. If he stays healthy, they'll be fine. The interesting thing is when all the worry about the cornerback position just suddenly disappeared once they signed Tramon Williams. And I think that was a ploy by Arians. Arians wasn't pleased. I don't think he wanted to have one of those no experience guys on the roster. I mean, they might bring a guy back onto the practice squad like a Ronald Zamort next year. I mean, he's on the IR, or Sojourn Shelton, or whoever they are. None of them looked like NFL players for the NFL roster. And when they brought in Brandon Flowers and they brought on Tramon Williams to talk, Arians sounded antsy, like I was hoping that we get one by now. And there was a concern about, we'll see what's happening. But as soon as Tramon Williams was signed, everything was fine. Now he's saying, "Hey, we're good. I haven't about 2 weeks ago stopped worrying about the cornerbacks." And that's because now they got Patrick. They got the starting job set with Patrick and Bethel. Brandon Williams really turned the corner when Tramon Williams was signed, whether it was just mentally something happened or the addition of Williams kind of sharpened his attention because of the competition. But Brandon Williams turned a corner, and he looks like a cornerback. And we know that Tramon Williams, even if he's old, is still worth something in this league. And so having him as a fourth corner, that's a great situation. Uh-oh. Well, Seth dropped for a second. He'll be back in just a second. And so I only keep the four cornerbacks on the roster. That's how it'll end up for me. I keep 5 safeties instead. I go 4 corners and 5 safeties. The 5 safeties I keep on the roster are as follows, which I think the first 4 everyone knows they're going to be. They're going to be Tyvon Brash, they're going to be Tyrann Mathieu, they're going to be Budda Baker, and they're going to be Antoine Bethea. The question is, who's the number 5 safety? And for me, that's going to be Rudy Ford. I've had Harlan Miller on my roster. It's been kind of going back and forth between Harlan Miller and Rudy Ford. And I looked at a couple of things, and this is what I saw. I think it's clear that Harlan Miller has the edge at safety. He's been playing well, and at least at safety. Rudy Ford, though, although he has had limited playing time on defense, is playing more on special teams and is making plays on special teams. The team really, really likes what he has to offer on special teams. He's also faster and more athletic than Miller, which gives them the better special teams option. Therefore, I have Rudy Ford making the team over Harlan Miller. It could go either way as well, and I'm okay with that. So we'll go with that. Rudy Ford on the roster as the fifth safety, not Harlan Miller. And Seth is back on. I think you can hear me again, Seth?
Yeah, I can hear you. I don't know what happened there. So, but yeah, just jumping in, I think Harlan Miller makes it. So that's the difference. I mean, you like Ford. He's obviously a better athlete. I just have concerns about the fact he hasn't been on the field at all, and we have seen Harlan Miller play the safety position. We have seen him lined up out at cornerback as well. We expected to see similar from Rudy Ford, and just kind of nagging injuries and ineffectiveness just didn't show that. It doesn't mean he won't make the roster. And in all honesty, it doesn't really matter. It just means a 6th round cut or a 6th round pick ends up getting cut. Either it's either the one or the one you don't.
And so, did you have anyone else? You just have the 5 safeties. You still go with just the 4 corners, or do you see one of the young corners sneaking on?
No, I thought Zamort might have had a chance before the injury, but they clearly wanted a veteran. I'm sure you talked about this. They clearly wanted a veteran from the beginning. Brandon Flowers, and then obviously signing Tremont Williams. They did similar last year, and it was looking at the guy that ended up, but Leon Hall that ended up with the Giants. So, and they ended up with Marcus Cooper. So, that they have a tendency to want to have somebody there in case the young guys fail. And it's still weird to call Bethel a young guy because he's in his, 6th season now? So
forever.
He's clearly a veteran at this point, but he's a young corner still in terms of playing time and that nature. At the safety position, I mean, who are you going to cut? Branch took a pay cut. He's basically taking over for Tony for TJ at this point. Antoine Bethea is kind of taking over the role of DJ Swearinger in that he's playing more of kind of a middle linebacker center field position and keeping things in front of him. He's not the guy you want in coverage, and we saw similar with DJ. And then obviously the Badger and Baker, they're not going anywhere. I mean, I guess the only thing you could have seen maybe happen was, if Matthew just couldn't get on the field and stay healthy, but he's been lights out. He's been their best secondary player in the preseason, outside of Patrick Peterson not getting thrown at all. And so, he looks like he's back to being a playmaker. So I really don't think at this point there's any concern or questions about the top 4 safeties. The question's simply, do they keep 5?
Yeah, and then if you look at the practice squad possibility, both Harlan Miller and Rudy Ford, if either one gets cut, could go to the practice squad. Ironhead Gallen is an interesting guy to consider for that position as well, as long as his leg gets completely healed. He's been playing with basically playing on one leg right now, but he's a guy that potentially could be a practice squad addition. Reminds me a little bit less physical of the Harold Jones-Corte, who ended up getting picked off waivers by the Bears and is still with them. So yeah, the defensive backfield, and I was talking to this kind of interesting. They did solid work against the Falcons, but then after, the group of the undrafted rookies, whether it's Sojourn Shelton, whether it's Jarrell Carter, whether it's Gump Hayes, Ryan Lewis, all those guys on the roster, you don't really know who they are. It didn't really matter. You always knew those guys were going to make the roster. And so the last little bit has to do with the specialists. And so we know Phil Dawson is going to be the kicker, and we know that's an upgrade over Chandler Catanzaro. We know that Aaron Brewer is going to be the long snapper. It just comes down to the punter position. Who do you have as the final punter on your team?
I think it's going to be Weil, and I don't think you can go right or wrong with either of these guys, because one bad kick early in the season is going to, why didn't we keep the other guy? So I think it's going to be Weil. He's done a better job with directional punting and hang time, which we know is a favorite of Amos Jones. So I think he will get the final nod.
And for me, I also have Weil on that final roster. He is, if they're going to use the punter as a kickoff guy now Phil Dawson definitely showed he could do it. He did the shorter kick on purpose, and then after there was a penalty, he kicked it out of the back of the end zone, which we haven't seen either of the punters do. Weil has been much better on kickoffs than Leone. And Arian said that Dawson prefers one guy over the other as holder, and based on who has done more holding overall in camp and in the preseason, to me that is also Weil. So because I give Weil the edge, basically I think they're a wash when it comes to punting, but Weil gets you the other stuff, the intangibles, the Drew Butler stuff, the fact that he can hold and is perhaps a better option as a backup kicker. I don't know. But so the other option is, here's the thing about that. Neither one of them are going to be great. They're going to be lucky if either one who they keep on the roster is consistently okay. And because it looks more and more we're going to have a lot of Drew Butler moments. And as long as they're not getting their punts blocked, honestly, as long as they're not getting their punts blocked, we're going to be okay.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a bad thing. So you're hopeful.
After that, now what are you looking forward to in the Trevor Knight? This is going to be the Trevor Knight game. It's not all Trevor Knight. We get a little bit of Blaine Gabbert, but Thursday nights, I'm going to be honest. It's Sun Devils opening night. I'm going to have to watch the Cardinals game on replay. That makes me a terrible Cardinals writer, I know, but come on, it's opening night for college football. Should I have said that on the show? I probably should not have.
No, I think it's fair. I'll be at football practice for a little bit, so it is what it is at this point. Like, some of these guys, I think you're going to get, hopefully you get some Dorian Johnson, you'll get Will Holden. It'll be slightly intriguing for a little while, and then I'm going to have to figure out I'm going to have to look at the roster sheet to see what number correlates with what player, so.
All right, so that kind of wraps up everything. We've given you our takes on the final roster. We've got it's not meaningless, but in terms of football and fans, it really is a meaningless preseason game coming this Thursday. Just keep guys from getting hurt. That's what we want to see. That way they're not, they don't have to keep them around on the roster simply because they can't cut them, things like that. But the next time we talk, we're going to be able to react to the final roster. We're going to be able to talk about what lies ahead for the Cardinals, as there will be regular season football following our next show. Right now, we've got one last preseason game. We've got roster cuts, and that'll be a wrap on this show. But next week, we will be preparing for real football and facing the Detroit Lions and the very, very, very rich Matthew Stafford. So can't wait for that show. Rise Up See Red is found pretty much anywhere you can find it. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Facebook. It's featured on Cards Wire and also on RevengeTheBirds.com or on Blog Talk Radio. You can find us on Audio Boom, also on iTunes. If you haven't subscribed to us yet, please do. And we would never complain about a 5-star rating. Absolutely not. You can also find us on Stitcher Radio and TuneIn Radio. On behalf of the Rise Up See Red podcast, I'm Jess Root. That's Seth Cox. We'll be back next week for show number 165. Go Cardinals and rise up, Sea Red.